Okay, welcome everybody. I think Melbourne Cup has depleted our numbers a little, so welcome anyway. And we've got quite a lot of information to show you today, so hopefully you find some of this useful. And then we've got opportunity for some questions towards the end. That should be recording already. Thanks. So we're having a look at some of the impacts around social media and particularly how that affects children, and then as young adults as well, which is very important. So when I started to sort of become aware of technology was around about when I first heard this music, which for anybody...
The final frontier.
So that's your Star Trek stuff. That came around in 1963, and that's when we started having a look at a few different ways in which technology might actually impact us in the world. The science fiction writers were the people that were coming up with the ideas. So they had things like the communicator, which the first versions of those would just basically look like a speaker and a couple of buttons that they pressed. Nowadays you think it looks like it's reminiscent of some of the early flip phones, but that's the function that they had back then. And then they had a thing called a tricorder, and you could get different versions. One was for medicine, had 3 or 4 different functions around medicine, did a scan of a person's body, and others were things like Spock would use for doing geology and working out what the physics of the planet was and the atmosphere and those sorts of things. Very clever. So they were thinking forward. The most famous thing probably is the phaser. Now, the phaser was a highly developed, really well-designed, engineered weapon, and yet in the 70-odd episodes that was in the TV show, they only ever set it to stun. I don't know why they didn't cover that. So about the same time that I became aware of Star Trek, I was living in London with my brothers and my mum and dad, and though TV shows were made in colour at that time, the real world didn't have colour for several years after that. Eventually it came along. My dad bought home a couple of old Bakelite telephones from a job that he was doing. And we, as kids, we thought that was great. We wanted one each. He had a big box of these old things from the 1930s that he cleared out of a house that he was painting and decorating. So we thought it was really cool just fiddling around with the dial and just making that really cool sound that nobody's heard that sound that's been born in the last 30 years or so. I've also seen some quite funny clips on YouTube where they're trying to get teenagers to work out how to use the rotary dial on a telephone. It's quite amusing if you want to have a look at that. But obviously, over time we know that the mobile phones have developed, and the original one weighed about 4 pounds, and you needed a trolley to carry it around with you. I remember walking through the campus with my first pride possession mobile phone, and a student said to me, "Why have you got a telephone kiosk strapped to your belt?" Because it was this huge great black block on my belt. So obviously things have moved on from there. Now really calling them mobile phones nowadays is a bit of a misnomer, because it does have a phone in it, but that's most of the time that's not what you're using it for. Mobile phones are very convenient for phones, but there's all the other functions that happen inside it. So we're doing our shopping, we're doing our internet, we're taking our photographs, we're doing our notes, we're recording audio, playing videos, playing games, watching the news, all those sorts of things. We call that convergence. And that's happened a lot because of the miniaturization of the digital technology platforms. Everything gets smaller so it can go into one box. Whereas back in Star Trek, you had a single device for everything you wanted to do. And that was what it was like in classrooms even 10, 15 years ago, was you had a camera, you had a sound recorder, you had this, you had that, to do whatever you needed to do. You had different devices for measuring science equipment measurement. But now you can use the sensors inside the phones. So we've got cameras, which is a light sensor. We've got GPS and inertial navigation inside our phones. Now, up until 20 years ago, you only got those things inside airplanes, and pretty expensive airplanes at that. So it's amazing. It's a dream come true for tech-minded people like me, I can't believe how much technology has changed from the time my dad introduced to me to the first couple of bits of electronics, because my dad was really interested in education and he wanted his kids to be interested in technology as it came through, and he would get us electronic kits that we would build and all those sorts of things. Now, we've come so far. Take, for example, the process of catching a taxi or shopping or communicating. All these things have been revolutionized beyond imagination. There's no way you could have foreseen what's happened to physical shops, the way in which that's been impacted by mobile technologies and our networks. So even phone calls. Who would have thought that a person walking around a supermarket talking to themselves was not completely mad and chattering nonsense to themselves? And nowadays we know that person's more than likely got a little earpiece in their ear and they're having a conversation with their friend. So today our concern is to learn a little bit more about social media. So the device is a platform for an activity, and we're talking about the activity of social media, and that's what we're going to focus on. Now, a couple of years ago, we were starting to get a little bit concerned around some of the things we were seeing in the media. So we're seeing a lot of newspaper and online articles around dangers of digital world for teenagers and children, social media becoming an issue, students and social media, what's happening with that, and all these research things were coming through from governments and from organisations. So we decided to have a little bit of a further look at this, and we found some things we were quite concerned about. And just before the COVID situation sort of came through and caused all sorts of things to happen in education, we were looking at this as a staff because we thought it was quite significant. So we were looking at things like this. I just preface this by saying that this information, when we looked at it, and I'm showing you what we saw as teachers, is from American data. But we do know that in almost every case, that within a couple of years, any social or technological trend that occurs in America and is studied in America, we eventually feel it, Europe feels it, and Australia and New Zealand feel it a couple of years later. So it's just a matter of looking on the horizon at America, and then you can just pull that through, and a couple of years later, that sort of trend happens in Australia, and that happens all the time. So we know, because we're similar sorts of communities, we're similar sorts of societies. So we looked further into some work done by Jonathan Haidt, who's a sociologist. He's written a few books on various trends across the last 20 years. And he found that if we looked at all the people between 12 and 17 who had at least one major depressive episode in the last year, and this was published in 2018, his book was published in 2018, so this has probably caught up with us in Australia by now, especially now we've moved even more towards using mobile devices with the COVID scenario. We found that the boys were toddling along around this is 5% by gender, and this is by self-reporting. So that data is people get asked a few questions, and if they answer a certain way for 5 or 6 out of the 10 questions, then it's notified as being an issue, and otherwise it's a non-issue. So they're judging it by self-reporting. But the girls have got a higher rate there. Now, if you have a look at the timeline across the bottom, this is quite important. You'll see that in a minute. 2005, you've got 5 and about 12% with the girls. And then if you go to 2016, which is when this data was pulled from, you've got 5. The 5 has become 7, maybe 8. But the girls have gone from 12 up to touching and going over 20. So that's quite a significant increase for the girls in that time period. You'll notice it kicks up around 2009, and we'll refer to that sort of 2009, 2011 data in a minute. Another thing, same sort of idea, looking at hospital admissions for non-fatal self-harm. This is where students have got something that's made them anxious or depressed or whatever, and for some reason they're presenting at a hospital. They might have cut themselves or done something like that in their state. So we've got the blue line there, which is the 10 to 14 year age groups, and then we've got, this is for males by the way, and then we've got the boys that are 15 to 19 year old are in the darker colour, and then the The orange color, which is the top line there, is the 20 to 24. So that although as we go across, they're going up and down a little bit, there's an overall sort of fairly flat trend there. But if we go and have a look at the girls, and the girls is the part with social media that we're most concerned about understanding, we notice that when you have a look at this, these are the same age groups, but this is just the girls in the same data set. We start off at 2001, and we've got, this is 100 people per population of 100,000. So that's just how they're working that out. So we're talking about 100 and something for the girls that are in the 10 to 14 age group. So this is the pre-teens, and then moving up to the orange, we've got something like 270, 280. But you'll notice again, the main thing is to look at the shape and how it kicks up. Again, if you look around the 2009, 2011 sort of time span. Now, we had a recording that we watched as a staff, where Jonathan Haidt would go through and just try and give an explanation for how some of this, why some of the possible reasons for this being such a difference between boys and girls, and why it seems to kick up in the 2000 to 2011 time span, and then going forward. So I'll just play you it's about 3 or 4 minutes from the clip. We watched about 11 or 12 minutes, but you'll get the idea of how this works.
The rate for the youngest girls, check that out. Now the youngest girls, these are 10 to 14-year-old girls. These are preteens, okay? They didn't used to cut themselves. They used to have very low rates. But bang, beginning in 2010, it shoots up. It's up 189%. It has nearly tripled in the last 5 or 6 years.
What's the cause?
We don't know for sure, but the reason why, so because of the huge sex difference, the leading candidate and the timing, look at that timing, is social media. So if you look at what happened in this country and all around the world, Facebook opens up to the world in 2006. You don't have to be a college student, but very few teenagers have a Facebook account in 2006. 2007, the iPhone comes out, but it's very expensive and very few teenagers have one. By 2010, 2011, around half of American teenagers have an iPhone or Samsung. They have a smartphone and they have access to social media in middle school. Because even though for Facebook and Instagram, I think the minimum age is and was 13, I mean, my son is 12, a lot of his friends have Instagram, you just lie. So middle school kids are now getting on social media. By 2010, 2011, you've got a lot of that. And that's what I think is the main cause of this, because social media does not really affect boys very much, but man, does it affect girls.
Why is that?
So if you look at, a couple reasons. First, look at the nature of aggression within the sexes. Boys, bullying is physical. Okay, boys are physically dominating, and then the risk is that they're gonna get punched, okay? So you give everybody an iPhone, what do they do with it? Games and porn. They don't use it to hurt each other.
Boys, you're saying?
Boys, that's right. It doesn't affect their bullying. But girls' aggression, girls are actually as aggressive as boys. There's research from the 80s and 90s on this. If you include relational aggression, girls don't bully each other by threatening to punch each other in the face. Girls bully each other by damaging the other girl's social relationships. Spreading rumors, spreading lies, spreading a doctored photograph, saying bad things, excluding them. It's relational aggression. And so it's always been really hard to be a middle school student. It's always been harder to be a middle school girl than a middle school boy, okay? So beginning around 2010, 2011, we throw this brand new thing into the mix. Okay, girls, here's this beautiful thing in your hand, and here's all these programs where you can damage anyone's social relationships any time of the day or night with deniability from an anonymous account. Go at it, girls. And so the nature of girls' bullying is hypercharged by social media and smartphones. That's one mechanism. The other two mechanisms are the social comparison, because it's always been hard to be a teen girl emerging with beauty standards and impossible beauty standards. And when we were kids, you had impossible beauty standards that these models were all doctored up and then Photoshop. Okay, so you've got these impossible beauty standards out there. But beginning with social media, especially in recent years, your own friends can put on a filter on Instagram to make their lips bigger, their skin cleaner, their eyes bigger. So your own friends are more beautiful than they are in real life. You feel uglier. So that's the social comparison of beauty. And then probably the biggest single one is the fear of missing out, the fear of being left out. So all kids are subject to this. Everyone's concerned about whether they're included or whether they're excluded. But girls are much more sensitive. And so suddenly when everybody is tracking each other's who was invited, who's there, and especially any program in which a girl puts something out and then waits to see what other people say about it, that is what's really damaging, I think. Again, let me stress, we don't know for sure. There are some experiments on this, but it's mostly correlational stuff we're talking about here, correlational data. But the overall experience of being a girl who was born in 1995 or later and got this stuff in middle school is different from being a girl born in 1990, let's say. We didn't get this stuff till college.
So they're looking at the timescales, and they're looking at the types of experiences that middle school students have as they go through. So what they're noticing is that they're getting a very, very much higher occurrence of particularly, not only, but particularly girls in the universities where the iPhone came in and has then been used. We use iPhone, but the iPhone and social media, the access to social media through the glass-fronted smartphone that we sort of are very familiar with, once that became more easily accessible in middle school, the students that were in middle school during that period of time are the ones that seem to have so much more anxiety. And again, he says it's correlational. There's a lot of more research being done around it, but these are worrying things that as educators and as parents we sort of need to know a little bit about. So following on from that, Mr. Heaney went through and had a look at some of the stuff that came out of the Growing Up Digital Survey, which was published, I think, earlier in the year that we were looking at this. So we were 18 months ago. We were actually looking at this as a staff, and we came up. These are the sorts of things they found out that 43% of Australian teachers and principals think digital technologies enhance teaching and learning. That's great because that's why we have it in the classrooms. 60% of teachers believe technology has positively impacted learning. Again, that's very useful, and this is particularly with students with disabilities, like students who need assistance with reading or structuring their learning. But 94% of Australian educators noticed an increase in the number of students reporting emotional challenges, and we would, Lauren will reflect on that later. 9 out of 10 teachers and principals in Australia observed an increase in students with emotional, social and behavioural challenges in school today compared with just 5 years ago. 3 out of 5 Australian educators have seen a decline in students' readiness to learn, and 2/3 have observed more children arriving at school tired. And there's also reflections around early learning with students coming into school and effects on socialisation and those sorts of things that may be linked also to use of social media and devices in the household. And 84% believe digital technologies are a growing distraction in the learning environment. So we're talking about where people have their experience of their learning is being fragmented, and they're being interrupted in some way, the flow of learning, because of the interruption of social media. And we talk a lot to our senior students about this. There's a lot of research around about even the proximity of a mobile phone, even if it's off, to your ability to focus. If you have that device, because of the relationship between the person and the device, even having that device near you, even though it's off, it's actually sitting there in the back of your head about, should I really go and check that? Do I think that there's something on there I might have missed? So we recommend that students take their phone into another suburb and just leave it randomly in a bush and then come to school or something like that. So. No, but we just try to let the students be aware that is a factor, so that when they're studying, they can they can make a sensible decision. So that's a lot of the data that we've collected and put in front of staff over the last couple of years, and this is an opportunity for us to put that same sort of information to our parents. This session is actually getting recorded, and we'll edit it down, and then we'll make it available to all the people that spent too much time at the Melbourne Cup today and didn't come in this afternoon. I'd like to hand over now to Lauren for the. Is that your? No, Ben. Sorry, Ben, and then yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Alex. Yeah, I'll just
make sure your slide goes on.
On here.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Look, thank you, Alex. And the stats and the research, I'll sort of touch on what that looks like and how that presents from a primary perspective. I will try and be brief. I do understand that the majority of our audience will be junior secondary and secondary, but I think it's really important to get the perspective from a developmental component. So what we see in primary, how the impacts of social media, screen time, internet usage present in primary, some of the challenge we are facing. But I wanted to start with coming from a wellbeing perspective, if you like, and just putting a bit of a context around what we focus on here in terms of building flourishing within our college community. And when we talk about flourishing in the language of mind, heart, soul, strength, particularly looking at the language around positive relationships, and we're trying to, through these sessions and through the work that we're doing right across the college, is to develop healthy relationships for our students with social media, but also with technology itself. So building a healthy relationship with the devices and understanding when to be able to switch off, what are the cues and what are the signs and internally that they can use to actually promote healthy choices around the use of technology. From a broad sense, if you like, when we understand wellbeing, we talk about wellbeing as feeling good and functioning well, two really simple components. The feeling good element, perhaps for our youth, is something they focus on a little bit too much, and I think that's the target of the some of the information that we'll be putting in front of you in terms of social media and its effect on happiness and its effect on how our kids are feeling and whether they're feeling rejected online, whether they're not getting the likes, retweets or the shares or the views or the followers, how that's actually affecting them and how that's making them vulnerable. That relates to feelings and emotions of happiness. What we need to focus on is the other element of wellbeing, if you like, the functioning well. So around meaning and purpose and service. And there's a whole other side that we focus on to take it away from that hedonic aspect of wellbeing. There are numerous benefits to technology that Alex has talked about. There are numerous benefits to social media and internet use. From social connectivity to education as teachers, the benefits are there, they're unbelievable. Down in the bottom corner there you can see personal social capability, and when we talk about the curriculum and general capabilities and self-management, self-awareness, social awareness and social management, social media actually provides a wonderful opportunity to teach these skills. The key though to teaching these skills is to model it. So when I'm talking to our primary parents specifically, modelling the use of social media, modelling responsible use of devices in the home, within the family, is really the key at that early foundational age to developing healthy habits. Teaching self-management, actually modelling it, knowing, seeing, having the kids see when you're switching off, and out loud saying, I've been on the screen far too much. If you're working on a computer all day, let's all go for a walk. I really need to go for a walk today. I've spent a lot of time in front of the screen. So they actually start thinking about that. Actually, I need to monitor my own time on the screen. So it's actually a wonderful tool to be able to embed some of that learning in the home, but we do that as well at school. So if there's lots of positives, what is the issue with our primary and right through the college? Screen time, actually, there's some research around screen time in developmental. I know Lauren will talk about brain development and the impact of social media and perhaps screen time on brain development. But their negatives from social media far outweigh just general screen time. The issues that we're seeing in primary really relate to the use of social media, and I'll show you a little bit of some of the apps, and I'm sure you're aware of the age limits to do with apps. But really in primary, we don't have any apps that our primary students should actually be on and be using, and we know, and that's not the case. They are actually on them. Jonathan Haidt actually referred to some of the statistics around what was happening in terms of increases in depression and anxiety. Around 2009, Facebook introduced the like feature, and he has gone back and done some further research and correlations between what happened in 2009 in terms of the like feature being introduced and the increase about 2 years later, like Alex was saying, that 2-year delay. 2011, Twitter introduced the retweet. Algorithms started being developed to tailor the experience online. How that is important for primary students. There's a lot of primary students that don't actually have devices, so they're using their parents' smartphones. They're picking up a device that somebody much older than them has just used. Now, if they've just been online searching and on a device with their Facebook open, and that device is now tailoring the experience to someone much older than the person actually picking up the phone, we need to be really conscious of that with younger students and in the home, so that they're not picking up something and having access and it's imagining that they're much older than they are. So there's some real issues around making sure that we're protecting our students in that regard. In terms of vulnerability, so we see particularly in primary, and there's some research around who is vulnerable and what we need to be really careful of, and that travels right through with us. But what we see is that if they are vulnerable outside of social media, so within their friendship groups, if they are having social issues, if they're having friendship issues, if they've grown up with some emotional regulation issues, they are more vulnerable once they get online and start connecting with social media to some of these bigger issues that we see. So it's really important, if we understand who the vulnerable students are at an early age, that we're providing them opportunities and teaching them social emotional skills, but also intervening in terms of friendships and giving them skills around that. As parents, it's really important to know your kids and know if they're actually coming home and talking about friendship issues from an early age. It's a bit of a red flag as to hold off as long as you can before you allow them to start getting these apps and interacting online. In terms of being vulnerable and being rejected, I talked a little bit about that notion of the well-being in terms of feeling good. When they're being rejected online, they become vulnerable, and there's a study that was done recently that heightened feelings of depression, anxiety, reduced self-esteem, online bullying and isolation, and this idea of the artificial environment where they're aspiring to be somebody that's presented in an absolutely perfect light by the digital filters and everything else that can happen, that they don't meet that. So then we're seeing, and this is starting to happen in primary, where we actually are seeing symptoms of anxiety, symptoms of worry presenting much earlier than we've ever seen before. It was a really good reflection on our recent camp that happened, those symptoms of worry around going on camp, and collectively it was a much bigger issue that we've had to deal with than in the past. But again, perhaps the feeling of being rejected and attaching that to some of their experiences that they're having through social media, online and on the internet, is contributing to that. The age restrictions, this is just a really simple one to put up for parents in primary and I think Lauren will have a really blunt message around when we should be introducing social media to our kids. But actually in primary it's really simple, we shouldn't be. If they are on any apps, are on any of the social media, they've lied about their age to be on there. We know that they are. We know for sure that our students particularly are on Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok. Facebook, I think, is sort of for the the granddads now, is it? It's a pretty much older app that means I'm on it, but hey up the back. But we are seeing students, particularly Instagram, Snapchat, but the other one in primary that is having a big effect is group messaging. So kids getting on where they just create groups. We talked about the FOMO and being left out. It's a real factor that we deal with quite often, the issues that are happening outside in the home, group messages that have happened, and then we're finding that we have to intervene and deal with them back at school. So again, while they're not technically on any app, they're using social media if they're creating group messages and the like. Lauren is going to talk a little bit more about some really practical advice moving forward. I would say if I could give advice from a primary perspective and from the primary parent's perspective, the most important thing that you can be doing is modelling really healthy behaviour around social media use, your social media use, modelling really healthy behaviour around device usage before bed, etc. But this top point is a really important one. Pausing, so when young students and young kids in the home that are coming and speaking to you and you're on your phone, on a device, stop, put it down and have a conversation with them to model that behaviour. More and more we see that people just aren't doing that, and you can just anecdotally look at that out in when you're at the shops or when you're seeing people talking to each other, who's actually stopping, putting their phone down so they can have that conversation face to face. It's a really important one to start modelling from the kids, getting it set from a really early age. The last one in terms of student protection, understanding feelings, and we do a lot of work particularly in primary around recognising our emotions, recognising our emotional state, but understanding that feeling of uneasiness or worry and when that needs to be a reportable thing, when they need to go out, reach out and talk to someone because they've seen something that's made them feel uncomfortable, talk to someone about it. That's a really important protective mechanism that we need to instill in them. Thank you. I hope that wasn't over the heads of all the junior secondary and secondary. I know it's really important that we do get that advice going, and you guys as a community, whether you're junior secondary and secondary, I know as a whole college community, parents, you are our allies in terms of going away and speaking to one another and giving advice to our primary parents wherever possible. You've been there, you've gone through the situation with developing students, so please, you are an asset to us. Go out and talk to our primary parents if you possibly can do that at all. Warren and Tadgh are our digital wellbeing champions. I'd like to introduce them.
Into this is the fun part.
Take that. Thanks, boss.
Thanks, Ben. Tadgh and I look after a lot of the digital wellbeing things, the cybersafety programs and things that go on within the college. Lots of people deal with any issues, and unfortunately for us, part that we're going to look at now is that when things do go wrong and what happens. A lot of our things come from the Safety Commissioner through the Australian government. So anything that we talk about, any resources you might need, a lot of times we'll direct you to that so that you can find out probably the most up-to-date and specific information. So the first thing I'm going to just sort of go through is there are laws around when things go wrong, particularly in the social media area and online problems that occur. So it is illegal to make, share, request, access or possess images or recordings. So we talk about that particularly with our junior secondary and into senior secondary students when things go wrong and they're starting to talk about sexting and things like that for in between with their friends and things like that. So under 18 is the age limit, but there's sort of a grey area for a fair few of these things. But even someone who looks like they're under 18 can these laws come into effect. So in a sexual way, we're talking about those things particularly. Kids, of course, will share images all the time. They'll send photos. They'll put things up on TikTok. that they want likes and things for. But when we get into this area, sort of intimate images and sexual things, that's a whole another area that has another layer and legislation and laws around that. So a lot of these things include posing in a sexual way, involved in a sexual act, with someone else who is posing in a sexual way or involved in a sexual act, or showing their private parts. Like, they're very specific in what they outline there for those types of images. And we'll just go through a few of the scenarios for what things happen. If your children are a part of this or find themselves in a sort of uncomfortable situation and they talk to you about it. From the college's perspective, we have certain procedures that we follow, and sometimes there are very, very strict guidelines about police are involved, we need to report things, and it's not just a thing that can be dealt with in-house. The school needs to take certain action but then pass it on to relevant authorities. So I'll just hand that over to Tadgh. He'll go through a couple of those and talk about them.
Thanks, Warren. All right, we've tried to put together 3 sort of likely scenarios that you might face, with the students, with children that are the age of your children. So the first one is that your child, unfortunately, whether they knew they were doing the wrong thing or not, have sent an intimate image of themselves to someone else. And it might be sort of purely innocent, but there's some things that we need to make sure we do. So as a parent, the main thing, and you'll hear me repeat this a few times, is just to stay calm, because they're probably going to realise straight away that, So if you can stay calm, even though probably in your kind of parent head you're like, this is not good, bring the mood back to calm. Explain to them why this is a problem. Don't obviously put the fear of God into them by saying it's illegal, but say we really need to deal with this properly because this could have some serious ramifications. A big thing is to stop them sharing it any further and delete the image from the phone. Because once again, referring back to that, the laws around that sort of stuff, even possessing that image is illegal or can be illegal. And the eSafety Commissioner, which you'll hear us mention a few times tonight, they actually have the power. In the last 18 months, they've actually got power through legislation to contact a lot of the major social media providers and ask that they remove certain images. And in most cases, they do adhere to that under Australian privacy law and things. So that's a good thing to sort of have that reassurance that it's not out in the social media world and continuing to be shared. This one here is if your child is to receive one and share it on. So it's not them that took it, but they decided to share an image on. Once again, stay calm, explain what the problem is and how can we combat it. Stop further sharing, delete the image, and then once again contact where that might have been shared to and see if we can get that removed. That's obviously a lot more difficult if they've texted through to someone else. The eSafety Commissioner can't really control who has it on their phone. You might like to contact the school and have a chat about how we can maybe see which parents receive that and what we can do there, but once again we don't really have a lot of power or authority over what people do in that respect. And this last scenario here is my child receives an intimate image of someone. So if that person, and I'll just state this pretty clearly, if that person is over 18 years old, then that's a directly to the police thing. But if it's someone of similar age, it might be within their friends group or someone in secondary that is under 18, we still need to make sure we report that to the police and follow police advice on that one. But there may be some other things that the police would be able to do in that scenario, like contact the eSafety Commissioner and try and follow some of those steps. So it's not necessarily going to be a legal off the court sort of issue. Now, as a college, and Warren sort of touched on, we don't have a lot of power to do a lot about these things, even if it were to happen directly at school, if it's a social media thing. But what we do is we follow a mandatory reporting procedure and process under our child safety or child protection policy. Depending on the nature of the content, we may also report. In most cases, we probably will report it to someone, and that might be the Anglican Schools Commission, Queensland Department of Education, Police, or even the eSafety Commissioner. We do not want the image shared with us. So a fairly common response is, Mr. Treanor, this image was sent to my student, what do I do? And you've passed it on to me. That puts me in a precarious position in the college because we now have possession of that image. So we want to get some general details so we can know how to support you and guide you, but we don't want the image sent to us. We'll not ask to see the image. that will be something we would say that device, whether that's laptop, whatever, will probably need to be used as sort of evidence with the police, or we delete it and get rid of it. And further support, there's obviously always, you can contact us. We have links and information on the Hive Learn as well, but you can, happy to call and you can speak to any one of us about any of the issues. We can guide and support you. Family Zone, which Darryl's going to cover off a little bit on that a little bit later. Youth Law Australia is really good because it puts a lot of this in plain sort of English, and it might even be something you can chat with your child about if the scenario happens. Let's have a look at some of the stuff and what do we do from here. Obviously the Queensland Police, but the big one I want you to take away from here is the E-Safety Commissioner. Lots of good advice, lots of stuff for parents, for students, things you can do with all ages of kids and resources and things as well. Printable digital posters and things that might just be able to help with that positive sort of behaviour online. But yeah, that's a really good resource that as I've said, we've used a lot, so touch base on that one. I'm going to hand over now to Lauren. Thanks.
Alrighty, bit of information overload, little bit. Okay, just to break things up for a second, you'll see as you came in, you all have a beautiful, colourful worksheet. I want to see how you went. Who was able to name every single app, every single social media app on the list? How did we go? Get even close? Okay. So this is not actually, I'm going to see how well the staff can actually do now. But 80%? All right.
Not proud of that.
I'll give you a second to have a crack, just to stretch, because we are going to edit this video, aren't we, Alex, before it goes out. So for those playing at home, you're not going to sit there for 5 minutes. Okay. So the thing I think to take away from this one is just as a little bit of a refresher. And by the way, I did give you an opportunity for notes and questions to write on the back so you can take some things home. But this is not actually an exhaustive list of the social media apps that are available. And the thing that is always a bit of a challenge when we're talking about social media is that the tech space is evolving way faster than the grown-ups can keep on top of. And there's many times, actually this year in particular, there were 2 on this list that I didn't even know existed until I was dealing with a crisis related to one of these apps where a situation had already gone horribly, horribly wrong. And I'm going, oh my gosh, what actually is that app? And so this is the challenge that we have, is that our kids are way further ahead in understanding what is available to them with social media than we could even hope to try and do. But the great thing is, as Warren and Tadgh talked about, we have things like the E-Safety Commissioner, we have Family Zone, where they have all this information available to you and you can jump on, and they have some beautiful summary pages to explain what they all are. Okay, ready? Let's see how you went. Who got Discord on the top one?
I knew it started with D.
And then, okay, ready? What's the next one down? Insta, the yellow one? Otherwise known as one of my most hated apps ever. Next one? TikTok, which also, if you didn't know, it was originally Musical.ly. So if you ever had kids who were on Musical.ly, where there was a lot of concerns about young people accessing this app inappropriately and a lot of things were going wrong, so instead of shutting it down, all they did was rebrand. So Musical.ly then became TikTok. And suddenly, it's a safe place that, of course, no children could get harmed in this space because we have a new logo and we have a new name and it's totally a different thing. Okay, old people space, Facebook. So this was the one that I actually learnt about this year, is Omegle. So if you haven't heard of Omegle, it's worth just educating yourself, because Omegle is a rapid chat space where you sign on, and what it does is it randomly pairs you to have a face-to-face video chat with someone anywhere around the world. It randomly pairs you. And if you can imagine the scenario where the college psychologist was involved after 12-year-olds were accessing random video chats with strangers around the world who did not have good intentions for those children, you can imagine the sort of scenarios that sometimes we're having to pick up the pieces with, going, oh gosh, I wish our kids just never found themselves in that space to start with. Then we have our lovely WhatsApp. How are we going down the bottom? Twitter. Okay, Darryl does not get to answer this one. What's the top one? Top right hand.
Microsoft thing.
This is actually the new branding of Facebook. So this will be Meta. So when you start to see, and again, It's all, they go, oh, things are getting phased out, outdated, no one's using it. Let's just give it a new name and a new logo, and suddenly it's a fresh new space. And then we have our lovely YouTube. If you don't know YouTube, you've been under a rock. The next one underneath it, a lovely person with a paper bag over their head. Does anyone know what that one is? This one is an app that's a little bit old now, but it's called Telonym. So it's basically a space where a young person can say anything anonymously about anyone they like, and it can't be traced back to them. So a young person might put a question out there and say, tell me what you think of me. And it invites anyone to jump on there and anonymously comment and share whatever they would like. So basically you can imagine it's a free-range bullying platform. If you know the next one, you might not want to admit it. Tinder. Okay. Now, you might think, why on earth would a high school psychologist be putting Tinder on a page? The youngest users I have been aware of actively using Tinder, 16. Okay, so if you think high school students are not using it, unfortunately you would be wrong. Next one? Messenger, which you don't actually have to have a Facebook account to use Messenger, but still our young people are jumping on it. A lovely Square, Roblox. And then during learning from home, a lot of our students enjoyed the joys of House Party. And then of course, if you want to learn how to do macrame or a beautiful cake, it is Pinterest. Or, well, actually, look, one of Pinterest, and something that I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about, is the fact that social media is not all bad, but it's a challenging space because a lot of these platforms are created with great intentions, but unfortunately human nature is we can take them to really difficult spaces. So Pinterest, while it's a beautiful place, I know that's often where people plan their weddings, and they might have collages about how they're going to design their house when they do a renovation, or in my experience is also where young students with eating disorders will create an entire wall of pro-ana inspo, which basically means images encouraging them to lose weight with dangerous, shocking, so a page that's all about inspiration of a thigh gap. And it can be hidden in something that looks, oh, honey, what are you doing? Oh, I'm just on Pinterest, just looking up some really cute things. Okay, no worries, because we hear Pinterest, we think you're doing art projects, not you're learning ways to mask eating disorder patterns of behaviour. So it's a challenge that it's an amazing space, but also a bit of a challenging space. But I don't like to do all doom and gloom, so I'll start with the good stuff. Okay, so there are some good things that come from social media. We can share our life, we can keep in touch with family and friends. So I went to school overseas, so for me, I love Facebook because it's how I keep in touch with all of my high school friends. We can play games. It's an amazing space to learn skills. I was not someone who grew up knowing how to do a wingtip on my eyes, or how to blend makeup, or how to feather my own hair and create different things. And I'm taught on a regular basis by 13 and 14-year-old girls that I need to improve my makeup skills. And they have learnt far more from watching YouTube and tutorials from different influencers and bloggers about how to do these amazing skills. I'm sitting there going, wow, okay, I've got 20 years on you, but your skills have way outshined mine. It's a place to share what's going on with our life, to look at funny videos, to actually find joy. It's a bit of a great boredom killer, and we're now learning that more and more of our young people in high school, even in junior secondary, have actually started businesses online where they are being entrepreneurs and making money. I learnt about a 14-year-old girl who's selling technological gadgets online that's got nothing to do with anything she does in her life, but found an entrepreneurial opportunity with her stepfather and started a business. I'm like, these are amazing things that our young people are doing online. And it's also a place where often young people who struggle face-to-face can find friendships and can find community and can find connection. Because if you're interested in something odd, you will find a group of like-minded people on social media who will share your weird and wonderful passion. And so it is an incredible place to find inclusion, but of course, with all the good, there can be challenges as well. So looking at brain development for the positives, okay? I'm starting with the good stuff. We can rapidly process, thinking about young people now, lots of information. They're learning to be able to take things in quickly and being able to discern. There's a lot of information that's about tailoring to their focus areas to keep that interest. You know, someone who disengages and gets bored easily There's things out there to go, oh, this is going to keep you engaged and focused and practice that sustained attention. There are areas to practice social skills. Believe it or not, Minecraft can be an incredible space to practice collaborative planning and social skills. You create a world with your friends where you're having to do architectural design and planning and town planning. Who thought that 8-year-olds are doing town planning? It's pretty phenomenal. And again, there is those areas to find connection. We're seeing images and clips from all around the world and understanding plights of people suffering in areas that we would have never known if we didn't see someone post a 2.5-minute video from somewhere in the Middle East, and kids are like, wow, that's amazing stuff, I've never seen that. So there's a lot of potential, and of course, how great are their thumbs? Their kids' thumbs these days are phenomenal. The fine motor skills that are coming with thumbs, now I do kid there because actual general fine motor skills are actually on the decline. But thumb dexterity, it blows me away. Okay. But I guess we've also got to be here to warn you and empower you to understand some of the negative challenges. Now, from brain development, something that I often worry about with early exposure to social media is about what I've called social emotional trauma. Okay, that's not a technical, you're not going to find that in a psych book. I often talk about psychology according to Lauren. I love to create terms that help explain complex concepts in a way that makes sense to me and hopefully makes sense to you. Because with the space of social media, there's so much out there that our young people are seeing and bombarded with. And a big challenge is that they're seeing things, someone discussed before, Ben was saying about content that's not actually designed for their age. And so they're being exposed to things that are way years above what emotionally they're actually ready to comprehend. And that can create some concerns and some real challenges in terms of feeling overwhelmed and emotionally not being able to process really complex concepts. That in particular relates a lot to sexualized content that our young people are seeing. And that's right. And you might be surprised or not surprised to know that in Australia, the statistics say that the average exposure, earliest exposure to pornography is 9. So by the age of 9, almost all Australian children have had some level of exposure to pornography. Okay, so we know pornography is not designed for them, but through social media, this is one of the quickest avenues that can happen. We're seeing more and more really rapid impulsive reactions. So something happens, they don't step away and take time to process. It's just I'm going to have an emotional reaction, and I now have the ability to respond instantaneously before I've allowed that emotion to make sense, before my frontal lobe has kicked in and I've been able to decide, maybe my friend didn't mean that. Maybe that I shouldn't respond in kind with that because perhaps they were having a moment and I needed to step back and be empathetic. And also there's a lot of privacy breaches that happen with social media, that someone will share something personal and then suddenly, before you know it, it's gone viral among a group. Social media does allow, as Ben talked about, in the group chat space, there's a lot of opportunity for social exclusion. So it's something that we see a lot, and it's quite sad that we're seeing it more in primary, but in high school in particular, in secondary, the simple creation of a chat group that unintentionally or intentionally leaves someone out can create a devastating landscape for a young person who then is feeling completely rejected. And sometimes the hard thing is, if someone's doing this really quickly, going, who's in the group, accidentally leaves someone off, no one's actually looked at the names to double check who's been left off. They've planned an entire weekend of events, and that young person didn't know about it until they saw it posted online, and it's like, well, where was I? Obviously they don't like me anymore. So lots of these little challenges can happen. Sleep deprivation is a big one. You'll see on your pages, and for those playing at home, I'll pop this up online on the Hive, looking at recommendations for sleep. So social media is tempting, it is invading the sleep space, and I'll talk a little bit more in a second about how to try and manage that, but it is really, really hard to ignore a ding. Dings are created to trigger that part of your brain that says, what's going on? Ooh, who's contacting me? Ooh, what do they need to say? And needing to respond, which if you are about to go to sleep and you hear a ding on the other side of your room, or unfortunately right next to your head, as is with a lot of people, it's really, really hard to step away and go, I'm not going to respond to that right now. Mood and anxiety issues. So we see a lot of young people with anxiety around, I need to keep up to date with everything that's going on, and connecting with the sleep aspect. I have a lot of teenagers in particular who won't go to sleep for hours because they're in a conversation. I said, well, why didn't you just disengage? Like, oh, well, I had to message my friend back because they contacted me. And so I didn't want to be rude. I had to respond. I had to keep up with it. And then sometimes I've spoken to the other side. I'm like, why didn't you just disengage? Oh, well, she was really desperately waiting for me to respond. So I had to keep engaging. And it becomes this ping pong of teenagers keeping each other awake because they all feel like the other person expects them to continually respond and keep up to date with things, which then creates stress, it creates anxiety, it creates that pressure, and it also deteriorates sleep. Jonathan Haidt, earlier you saw on the video, was talking about that social comparison about, oh, now my friends, I can see everything about their life is beautiful, it's more perfect, it's more exciting than mine, and it creates a really negative self-reflection sometimes. And again, we see a lot of young people just deep diving into the rabbit hole of social media and just being immersed and bombarded with negative content. Talked about fine motor skills, and things that we see a lot of is lower frustration tolerance. So if you've ever had a battle, and I'm going to throw it to staff as well here, where you've said, okay, time to hand over your phone. And if your child, if you are living in this beautiful world where your child goes, sure, Mum, here you go. Thank you so much for letting me use the phone. I really appreciate the time that you allowed me that privilege. I don't think many parents have had that experience. I think it's usually met with some level of resistance, potentially followed by tantrums, potentially followed by, I hate you, you're the worst parent in the world, you're ruining my life because now I don't know what's going on and everyone else does and I'm going to be left out tomorrow when I get to school. Okay, so sometimes our little bubbling pots of emotion and development don't know how to handle some of these difficulties because they're getting so used to everything just being available, and there's instant gratification, which is rewiring the brain. And again, I'm hearing a lot of families say to me, how do I get them out of their room? They're just in their room on their phone. So there's a constant flow of disengagement from family time, which again, we know that healthy emotional development comes from relationships, not from staring at a glass screen all the time. I did fine motor skills twice. Obviously, I'm really concerned about fine motor skills, but and family time. So, okay, I wanted to jump to impacts on the reward pathways. So, 10-second snapshot of the brain. There are parts of your brain which get excited from certain things, and it sends dopamine rushing through your brain, which then tells you, hey, I want to do this again. That felt really good. It's amazing. I got a rush of joy, of satisfaction, of endorphins. I need to do that again. Our young people are actually getting those rushes from dings. Literally that sound of their phone going off. From a flash. Alex talked before about having your phone in a study space where just having that phone there and in the corner of your eye, seeing it light up, can create a dopamine rush where you've completely disengaged from your history assignment right now and you're over there because it's the excitement of who's contacting me, what do they want to share, what's going on. And so we're actually seeing young people who are rewiring their brain, and their pleasure centers are becoming so required for instant gratification that things that used to make kids happy actually are not making kids happy as much anymore. You know, going for a walk and going for an ice cream, it's like, no, I'm good, I'll hang out and watch YouTube. Whereas if my parents had said, hey, do you want to go for a drive for an ice cream? I'd be like, I'll be in the car turning it on before they even get there. So it's about, you know, humans, we're not actually evolving that much, but we're rewiring how our learning pathways and pleasure pathways are happening, which can be a little bit of a concern because we're seeing now from research that connections with social media and smartphones and some of the wiring and responses in the brain is actually similar to things like illicit drug addiction. And so the same functions and the same light up. So if you're really interested in neurobiology, go look up functional MRI scans in response to social media and phones, and they actually can see different parts of our brain and those pleasure centers lighting up just based on certain things. It's quite remarkable. Okay, if you don't know what an algorithm is, I can't actually specifically explain to you code-wise. The tech gurus at the back of the room can actually explain to you what an algorithm is, but I need to explain to you why you need to know about them. So an algorithm is essentially a whole bunch of techie planning numbers that's way beyond my capacity to understand from a scientific perspective, but what you need to know is algorithms are how our technology is becoming smarter. And our algorithms unfortunately, while they're designed to make things cool and to make it streamlined, to make it more efficient, it's actually manipulating us, and it's actually quite harmful. And so I wanted to show you from a psychological perspective. But just to understand, so engineers are studying our behaviour, and they're looking at how to tailor our experience. So it's a marketing gem, because we go, okay, Mark's really interested in certain technological radios on Pinterest, so we're going to now send him ads that are connected to that, and we're going to find different experiences that specifically relate to him. So when he picks up his phone, it's like, oh, this is a really personalised, tailored experience. And they get this data from anything you engage with. When you like something, when you follow something, when you share something, there's these little markers that are storing this information, so that the next time you're on a device, it's like, okay, how can we use that information to tailor your experience? So when you look for certain things, you'll be shown more of the similar content. So you have to think about this for a second. The more you look at, the more you're going to see similar stuff. So a little bit of self-revealing here. You're going to see a moment where I yesterday screen recorded what Instagram suggests to me as the reels should be on my Instagram. Hopefully I can play this video. Is it going to start, Alex? Because normally there's a little button.
Of two types of people. One person who is boring with another person who is crazy.
My arms are small, my legs are small, my feet are small, my head's small, my eyes are small. Because that's just my baby dog. That's just my baby dog. That's just my baby. That's just my baby.
I had a lot of things to do today, but you know what I did instead? I took a nap.
Okay. So you can probably guess that I follow a lot of dog pages on Instagram. I used to have an Instagram page for my dog. May he rest in peace across the Rainbow Bridge. But when I had his page, the amount of amazing content that was recommended to me, that I had to see all of these amazing dogs all over the world. I'm currently a big fan of this skateboarding bulldog in America. It's pretty phenomenal. But the thing is, when I jump on Instagram, because I don't use Instagram for much except for following dog videos and looking at environmentalist bloggers and sustainability things. I'm like, okay, how can I change that? I'm a little bit of a greenie nerd who loves dogs. Okay, so when I jump on there, that's what I'm going to see. So I did this for a second. I just captured a little bit. Every second or third suggestion to me was a funny dog video. And I went, okay, I can handle that. But I want you to imagine for a second that I was a depressed 13-year-old girl who spent a lot of time looking for things that matched my experience. And when I was feeling really down and really struggling, and I couldn't get those words out, and I couldn't explain to anyone how I felt, I went online to find other people who felt the same. And I did that for a little while and engaged with a couple of things and followed a few things. This might be the sort of suggestions that down the track Instagram might suggest for me to see consistently. Okay, there's no sound with this one, but basically it's just a stream of content about self-harm. So this was, so I was experimenting with this. So I actually went searching and started to click and engage with lots of things to see what sort of things would come up on my Instagram feed. Thankfully, I've obviously spent over a year specifically looking at funny dogs, so it wasn't completely bombardment, but this took about 3 seconds to get those sorts of suggestions through my phone, and the amount of content that was there readily available, all I had to type was harm, and the amount of immediate pages or Fitspo or different diet programs, anything to do with depression, anything to do with suicidality, the amount of dedicated pages and content that's just there, that's really dark, is quite a concern. So if you imagine that, our young people might be struggling and engaging with that, these algorithms are going, oh, hey, you're back? Cool, here's some more depressing content. they might have had a really great day, but instead it's like, oh, but remember yesterday you wanted to cut yourself? Here's all these images of all these people who've done that in the last 24 hours. And so it's a really hard, it's a bit of a battle sometimes that our young people face, because they have to then make these decisions, which we know they're not capable of because those frontal lobes haven't finished growing, of going, hold on a second, step back. And so it's really tough. And so the more harmful content you look at, social media will suggest more. And so it can be a bit of a battle for young people to learn to self-regulate that. So they need us to understand that these things are happening. So that's why I wanted you to understand algorithms. So if you have young people who are using social media who are looking at amazing things, they're going to see more amazing things. And if they're deep diving into some really dark things, they're going to see more dark things. Now, the good news is, and there is hope in this, that we know specifically that talking about depression and suicide does not increase risk of depression and suicide. In fact, it's actually the opposite. Talking about depression and suicide risk actually decreases depression and suicide risk as long as there is a frame of hope and support in that. Unfortunately, though, and look, and don't get me wrong, there is a lot of social media content out there that is really hopeful. So I was actually quite encouraged that when I went through some of this, yes, there were reflections of people who are struggling, but then there was a lot who were inspiring and saying, hey, I've come through this. But unfortunately, when you are in a really dark space, that's not the stuff you're seeing, that's not the stuff you're paying attention to. And so we need to be mindful that we need to have these difficult conversations and talk about mental health, talk about risk, talk about well-being, knowing that those can be very life-saving conversations, because if we're not having the conversations and the content that they're consuming is really harmful, then that's a bit of a concern. So I'm just about done, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of the things that we are seeing. Okay, so this is just a couple of the things that I see on a daily, weekly basis. And this is not CAC specific. This is from every school that I've ever been affiliated with, and working in private practice, working with teenagers everywhere. This is consistent. Okay, so obsessional patterns of behaviour. Whether that be diet culture, whether that be obsessional connection with the phone, that fear of not being able to let it go. FOMO, fear of missing out. What don't I know? What am I missing out on? That social exclusion. A big one that we see though a lot, and I've got a couple of colleagues in here who have the beautiful task of having to handle situations with students when they've gone wrong, is that we see that when there's conflict with young people, when it's just face-to-face, we can tend to take the heat out of it and de-escalate it through some really helpful conversations when you deal with it face-to-face. And that's something we really encourage and believe in at the college, is that when something's gone wrong, we try to sit down and have no blame conversations to go, let's try and get to the bottom of this so you can grow and flourish and move forward. But unfortunately, when they take it online, these things go from little ones and they rapidly escalate and erupt very, very quickly. And what we can see, we go one day, okay, things are going well, and then go home and overnight a situation has erupted, and the next day we can see a very different outcome. It's because that rapid engagement through social media sometimes, and that inability to take a step back and know when to stop, know when to rest, know when to disengage, can be a challenge, and that desire to have to deal with everything instantaneously and now can be problematic. So again, privacy breaches, sharing of information that's not yours to share. We have really self-conscious, as Jonathan Haidt was saying, it's always been hard to be an adolescent. It's always been harder to be an adolescent girl in particular as far as self-consciousness, but all of our young people are handling and having to deal with this. Now, don't get me wrong, our boys are dealing with social media challenges. They're just sometimes a little bit different to what the girls are dealing with, so I don't want to exclude them, but dealing with social media, we're encouraged to be egocentric. It's about posting all about me and what am I doing and how beautiful do I look. I've had many conversations with our young people recently about the appropriateness of their photos, and a couple of conversations in particular, I've talked to them about, how did you feel when you posted that? Like, oh, I felt really confident and I felt really good about it. I said, well, let's actually discuss the content. And sometimes they're actually quite sexualized photos, and they've felt like they had to present sexualized content as this is how I show people I'm confident, this is how I show people I'm feeling good about myself. It's like, well, let's take a step back. How do you feel knowing that this person have actually seen that and they didn't have that same reaction? And it can be really, really hard in terms of understanding, okay, how do I present myself? How do I establish confidence without feeling like I need to present something that's maybe not genuine or maybe overly mature or hypersexualized. And we talk about high levels of perfectionism, because not many. I think one of the reasons I think Celeste Barber is so popular, because I think, and I don't know if many blokes in the space know who Celeste Barber is, but I think women love her because she goes out of her way to look ridiculous and goes out of her way to make fun of things that look perfect. And we just go, oh gosh, I love you, because she's like, yeah, I'm going to take this thing that looks overly perfect and I'm going to make fun of it and normalize situations. And I think not many people do that, because we might love someone like Celeste, but then still go, oh, but I'm still going to look through all my pictures and make sure I pick them only the nice one before I put it out there. I encourage us all, start posting ugly selfies, okay? This is how we're going to role model. They said role modelling appropriate social media use. We all need to start posting unattractive selfies so our kids go, you know what, life's not perfect. And then obviously addiction behaviour and that challenge of just not knowing how to turn off and when to turn off. So my last slide for you, a couple of tips. What can we actually do about it? So if you have primary students, if those listening have primary kids, I encourage you, don't let them on social media. Actually, I implore you, don't let them on social media. If they are on social media, they are young enough for you to revoke it and they will get over it. If you have young people under 13, try and support the other parents. Have each other's back by all saying no as long as you can. Because it's really, really hard if you're the one parent who's saying no and you know that more than 3/4 of your child's friends have these devices and these apps, and you know that by saying no, you are intentionally resulting in your child's exclusion from certain social spaces. That's a really brutal space to be as a parent, when you're like, I'm trying to do the right thing, but I know that by doing the right thing, I'm resulting in their social disconnect. And that's really, really tough. So have each other's back by just everyone say no. It's going to make your life so much easier. Keep in mind, legal access age for most social media apps is 13. So I often talk to young people about this, because I say, if you are under the age of 13 and you have these social media apps, you have actually committed your first legal offence of fraud. And they don't quite understand that, but when you actually break it down, and I've actually spoken to some parents who know that their children have it, I said, do you realise you've actually enabled your child to commit fraud and they've actually committed an illegal act? And we haven't actually thought about that. It's that, would you allow your child to lie about their age to buy alcohol and to go into a bottle-o? It's like saying, oh, here's a fake ID, it's okay, you can go and do this, because, it's not that big a deal. Whereas we're actually saying at 10 years old, oh, that's okay, you can lie to an illegal contract and say that you're 13 so that you can have access to this. Because the challenge that I'm now seeing with those is, as Ben was saying before, a lot of the content is being shown as if they're older. I'm now talking to 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds, and some who, let's say 13-year-olds, who are allowed to have social media, but then they're actually being suggested content for 18-year-olds. And it was a little while ago I clicked to figure out why that is. Because according to the app, they're 18. Because they've had that social media, they lied about that social media and said that they were 13 when they were 8 or 9. And so according to the app, they've already aged 5 years, so they're 18. So now they've only just turned 13 and they're getting content suggested them for 18-year-olds. So that is a bit of a concern. Okay, as parents, please set limits. And start young, because the later you wait, for those who have teenagers who are already pushing the boundaries, and I know there are many in this room who've either lived that experience or are currently living that experience, or those playing at home who are living that experience and holding on for dear life, set limits as early as you can, because the later you come in with this, the harder it's going to be. In particular, ideally, no devices in the bedroom, especially at primary, and that's actually a child protection aspect. So from the ASC, from the Anglican Schools Commission, we had a cybersafety expert who used to work on Team Argos, which was the police ring that was designed to trap pedophiles. And he used to come in and talk to our students, and he would tell us, for every 300 followers that a child has on TikTok, at least one of them is a registered pedophile. And they had done those stats time and time again in Project Argos, And I know how many young people even just have gaming TikTok pages and that have got maybe a few thousand followers. Think about how many of those people are following your children, and they go, oh yeah, but it's not that big, they're not showing that much information, but they have a direct access to your child. And so behind closed doors, you can't police that, because your kids aren't going to tell you necessarily if something is a little bit off, because then you're going to remove their device. Judith Locke, who's a clinical psychologist and expert in looking at child development, her rule is no devices on wheels, and I love that. So that's none in prams, none in trolleys, none in cars. That's where we have the opportunity to let our imaginations wander and our conversations to flourish. So that's a really nice one to think about. And just from a scientific perspective, to surrender devices 30 to 60 minutes before bed, because we know that devices suppress melatonin production in the brain. We need melatonin for sleep. So the longer you have the device in front of your face, the harder it is to wind down and go to sleep. And now, as parents, please monitor your social media accounts. And I've said at least until your children are 15. I know parents at the college who monitor and who have made it very clear with their children they will be monitoring until they graduate. But I also know some parents who said, oh yeah, but my child's really responsible. I said, yes, they are, but you don't know but what everyone else is doing. And they also have an underdeveloped frontal lobe that I'm sure when we were all responsible young people, we never made mistakes or were tempted by things that we shouldn't be doing. So to monitor that and to understand the devices they're using and to understand the apps they're using. So I've just put a little note there. My pet peeve is Snapchat, because you can't actually monitor Snapchat. It's because they send it and it disappears. This is why, just a little side note, and I was talking to some staff that the latest media have been sharing that Snapchat is the way that drug dealers are now connecting with our children, because they can send messages out just to the local area that kids get them, and they disappear. And our young people can respond and send messages, and then they disappear. So there's a lot of untoward people who are accessing young people using Snapchat, knowing that parents can't actually police it, because 30 seconds after the messages appeared, it's disappeared, and there's no trace of it. So Snapchat, if you could ban them from one app, I would say Snapchat. Hold off until they're 15 if you can, and if you can't, at least have really detailed conversations about it. But look, the big one, role modelling. If you notice that sometimes you find it hard to disengage, think about with a fully developed brain, if you find it hard to disengage, imagine what it's like for an underdeveloped brain. And again, utilise the resources we have at the college. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Darryl, who's our head of IT here at the college. So thank you.
So Lauren was talking, not just Lauren, everyone's been talking about the good things and the bad things when using the internet. So as parents, what tools have we actually got to try and moderate and actually monitor what our kids are doing? It's a question that came up, I think 4 years ago when I first started at the college. And I wanted to go to the market to see what we could do, not only to kind of detect what was happening at the college when the kids are using the device at the college, but also give our parents a tool so they could actually monitor what's happening at home as well. So who here's heard of Family Zone? Put your hand up, yeah. Okay, so as a parent at this college, you've got full access to this product, okay? And what I'll do is I'll go through some of the features now because they're really cool and you're gonna get a lot out of it. So, what can it do? So you can see there, we can set bed and study times. We can block adult content, manage social media, manage streaming, restrict apps. It works with the schools and the schools' devices. You can limit gaming. You can track the devices too if you want to know where your kids are. You can get reports and alerts sent. And you can also make sure they're only connecting to safe Wi-Fi connections as well. So if you look in the premium line, this is what you guys get access to. You can view the browsing history. You're going to get expert advice, weekly snapshots, all the tools that you need to be able to monitor what your kids are doing. Over on the picture there, this is when you install the Family Zone app, and if you haven't done it, get it done now. Get it installed, because if you've got a child from year 7 to 12, you're going to be able to see exactly what they're doing on their laptops when they're at home. You're going to get this instantly straight away. So if you've got multiple children in the school, you can just click on one of them, and then you get to then actually monitor and basically set the rules, okay? So as Lauren was talking about, it's easy enough to set those guidelines and say, right, 10 o'clock, internet's off. But if you're not in that bedroom all the time, that device is in the bedroom, they're going to be tempted to go on. So we're going to talk about internet and filtering rules. So the way Family Zone works is it kind of splits it up into 4 different sections. You've got your time when you're at school, you've got play time, you've got study time, and you've got bedtime. So obviously when they're at school, it follows our guidelines, the things that we want to block to make sure the kids can access things. But when it gets to home time, this is when you guys can then take control. So you've got the option between playtime, study time, and bedtime. Playtime's exactly that. It will give them full access to all the games. It'll let them enjoy and have a bit of fun. But if you want to say, hey, as soon as you finish school, you've got between 4:30 and 6 o'clock to do your homework, you set it to study time. And what the app will actually do is it will block all the games, all the apps, any gaming websites, and it will only give them access to educational resources, so they're not tempted to go and play the games. And the last one's bedtime. So you can actually set a timer, say, right, at 10 o'clock at night, no internet, and it'll actually cut internet off the device. So, as you can see here in the picture, you can actually block all these different types of social medias depending on the time that I just mentioned then. So there's a great one. Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. If you don't want your kids to access it, you can block it. But you can just block it at night time too, you can see there as well. So they can have full access to it, but if you don't want them to have the temptations of using it at night, just block it at night time. Now this is a great tool for you guys. So Lauren, obviously, you've got these pieces of paper in front of you, and you've got all these different types of social media, and some of them you don't recognize. And even there's a couple there that I didn't recognize as well. It's because there's so many different apps coming out all the time. It's really hard to keep in touch with it, even for me as well, So what Family Zone does is, it'll actually scan your kid's device, and it'll actually show you all the apps they've got on there, okay? And then when you click on the app, this is a really bad picture otherwise, but it'll actually show you all the apps on here, and it'll actually give it a rating. And it'll tell you whether it's unsafe, whether they recommend it, whether you should be cautious. And when you actually click on the app, it'll give you a detailed explanation of what the application does and the dangers of using it, if there are any dangers. So, I'm an IT professional. The internet's great. There's a lot of really good things you can do on the internet. So, using a product like this to block, that's fine. But I think where this product comes into play is you can actually encourage to have that talk to your kids about the use of it. So being able to click on it, getting that expert advice of the things that you need to talk to your kids about, and say, right, okay, Instagram, you're 13, you've got access to it now, but you've got a list here now of all the dangers that you can actually talk to your kids about, so they're aware of what's going on. And like I say, it will scan the entire device and it will show you all these apps. So if you see an app and then you go, hang on, what's that app? I've got no idea what that is. You can click on it and get an expert understanding of what is going on. And then you can then have a chat to your kids about it. And you can say, well, actually, look at all these dangers. Are you aware that these things can happen? And then you can make that decision whether you want to block it or not. So this is a really good feature that comes part of Family Zone. And as well as that, you can obviously, you've got all your internet filters as well. So you can block pornography, you can block sex education if it's not age appropriate, you can block gambling. And again, it's split up between those 4 different time zones as well. Now, just so you guys are aware, if you've got kids between year 7 and 12, we already put internet filtering on these devices. Pornography is already blocked on them, even when they're at home and when they're at the college as well. So all the nasties are blocked. Social media isn't blocked though. Unfortunately, that's up to you guys. So it's a really good tool for you guys to be able to see what's going on and actually then manage that. And this is how you manage your screen time. So when I was talking about the being able to manage playtime, study time, and bedtime, you can set up the routines. So Monday to Friday, you can say, right, as I mentioned, you can say between 4:30 and 6 is study time, get your homework done. Then you've got a bit of playtime, and then it's bedtime. You can also set it up so on rest days, so on the weekends, you can make it so they can play all day. It's entirely up to you. Actually, one great thing that I'll mention too is if they're studying and they're finished studying and they want to then play, they can actually request a change. They can click on the app and they can say, right, I've finished my homework now. It will send you guys a push notification on your phone, and then you can say, if you believe them, okay, I'm going to change that now from study time to playtime. So some really good functionality in there. I'll keep it short because I know it's getting pretty late, but there's a lot of functionality and there's a lot of things you can do in there. Install the app, just get it on there and have a look at it. If you haven't already signed up for your account, if you actually get in touch with Family Zone, they'll actually be able to help and support you. That's another good thing about this product. We don't have to fully support the product. You can talk to them. Say I'm a parent from Coomera Anglican College, and they'll actually help you go through. If you haven't received your emails, actually what we'll do is I might actually send out emails to all the parents if you haven't already set up an account. And if you have set up an account, get on there, get it installed and start having a look, because there's some really good functionality in there. Right, I'll keep it nice and short, and I'll hand back over to Alex.
Okay, so you've seen a lot of information this evening, and obviously you've got your own experiences as well, and knowledge that you've got as well. So hopefully that helps us to have those really good conversations at home. I think that's the main thing, is having enough information to have good quality conversations and to keep that communication channel going all the time. Because then if you've got that good relationship with your kids as you come through, then if something does go wrong, then they're more likely to talk to you about it, and then you'll know quicker. We're all here to assist you if you do have any questions, or you're not sure how to set up the software, or if you need technology plans, Warren and Tadgh can help with those sorts of things. So we can help you with all those sorts of things. So basically, thanks very much for taking the time to come out this evening. We're going to put some of this together as a recording, probably in sections for you to either review or for people who weren't here to see. I'd like to thank the presenters for all the information that they've prepared for us this evening, and may you have a good evening and enjoy a really good sleep, with making sure you get the right amount of sleep and that you turn all your devices off at the right time. So go well. Thank you very much. Cheers. Thank you.